I would like to welcome everyone to the 35th day of the session, Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Today in history, there's actually a couple of gems. March 1st, 1872, Congress authorizes the creation of Yellowstone National Park. Another interesting one, March 1st, 1877, Jack McCall, Wild Bill Hickok's killer, is arrested. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll call for the 35th day, Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Allemand.
Excused.
Allred. Here. Andrew. Here. Angelos. Here. Banks. Here. Bear. Here. Berger. Here. Brown. Burkhart. Here. Byron.
Excused.
Chadwick. Here. Chestick. Here. Clauston. Here. Conrad. Here. Crago. Here. Davis. Here. Eklund. Here. Haroldson. Here. Harshman.
Excused.
Einer. Einer.
Here.
Warnock. Henderson. Here. Jennings. Here. Knapp. Here. Larson Lloyd. Here. Larson JT. Here. Lawley. Here. Locke. Present. Nyman. Here. Newsom. Nicholas. Here. Nemec. Here. Northrup. Here. Oakley. Here. Obermuller. Here. O'Hearn. Here. Olson. Here. Ottman. Here. Pendergraft. Here. Penn. Here. Provenza. Here. Rodriguez Williams. Here. Sherwood. Here. Singh. Here. Slagle. Present. Smith. Here. Stith. Here. Storer. Here. Strock. Stivar. Present. Tarver. Here. Trujillo. Here. Walters. Here. Ward. Here. Washut. Here. Western.
Excused. Here.
Winter. Here. Wiley. Here. Yin. Here. Zwanser Dan. Here. Zwanser Dave. Here. Speaker Summers.
Here.
Allemand.
Chief, let's hold that roll open just in case the Chairman Harshman steps in from his tour of the Capitol. Our prayer of the day will be by our very own Representative Washut. Please rise.
Good morning, members. From Ephesians, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. Lord, this morning I pray that your blessings be upon this house and these members. Let this be a day when the worldly passions of partisan politics might step back a bit. That today we can see within one another fallen, imperfect creatures with whom we have much in common. Let us pause and be thankful for the abundant blessings that surround us. We awoke in warm beds, ate filling meals, dressed in fine clothes, and we are working indoors in the most beautiful building in our state. We are truly blessed in so many, many ways. Thank God we live in Wyoming. Amen.
Amen. Representative Washut, that was wonderful. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The House will please come to order. Chairman Eklund, you have a privilege of the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I do. This morning we have the Burns Elementary fourth graders here. Their teacher is Christina Patterson. And I think there's another teacher up there, but more teachers. Anyway, I'd like to welcome them there from home.
Yay! Welcome to the House. Representative Henderson, do you have a privilege? Representative Henderson,
Privilege, Mr. Speaker.
please.
Thank you. This morning, Representatives, we have 5 Eagle Scouts with us here in the north or the west gallery. These Eagle Scouts have been recognized earlier this morning by the governor, and they come from Gillette, Sheridan, and Cheyenne. Please stand up.
Welcome to the House. Does anybody else have a privilege of the floor? Nope. Members of the House, each year the Wyoming Legislature sponsors the Legislative Internship Program, which allows students enrolled at an institution of higher education to obtain credit along with a unique insight into the legislative branch of government and its vital responsibility in creating public policy. High school interns, who are sponsored by individual legislators, are also an important part of the program and typically serve for 2 weeks during the session. Intern Coordinator Lavonda Kapsa joins us along with some of the interns. Lavonda, please say a few words about the program, and then we would like each intern to introduce themselves and share with us where they are from and future career plans. Representatives, please help me welcome Lavonda and these students to the House.
Well, thank you so much for that really warm welcome. And I just want to tell you that this is one of the best intern groups I have ever had. We've had some great singular interns for many years, but they have really bonded and worked hard together and do projects, encourage each other, and that's been a very much of an inspiration for me as well. These are 8 of the 15 that we've had this year, and we have gotten to do a lot of really cool things. Just for those of you that don't know, we visit the governor and the first lady, we visit the Secretary of State, the auditor, the treasurer, superintendent of public instruction. We just got back from a meeting with Justice Boomgarden at the Supreme Court and visit the Judicial Learning Center. So they get to see all 3 branches, just sort of in their different elements. We went to oral arguments with one of the cases that was here, just so they could get to experience that. We visit the majority and minority in the House and the Senate leadership, and the congressional delegates. So just if you know anyone that is interested in the internship program, that are some of the really fun things that we get to do together as far as educational. And then of course, it's just a great process learning experience for them. So I am now going to just let them say their name and where they're from. And what did you say, career goals? Or career goals. All right. And let's start with Allie at the other end.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Allie Van Wy. I am from Chugwater, Wyoming. I am a senior at Chugwater High School. I am interning under Representative Olson. Next year, I will be going over to the University of Wyoming pursuing a business degree, and I hope to work towards my law degree as well.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Brown. I'm currently a sophomore at the University of Wyoming studying political science. I am a college intern here working for LSO. And future career goals, I want to go to law school, eventually become a lawyer, probably in constitutional law. And then just in general goal, hopefully one day become a member of the legislature, be able to get that cuspidor.
Hi there, I'm Jenna Broomfield. I'm a senior here at East High School, the best high school in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I represent Dan Zawanitzer. I plan on going to the University of Alabama this coming fall, and I'm going to pursue a pre-law major. So yeah, or be a stay-at-home mom. Either one works.
I'm Katu Wiggum. I'm a senior at East High School too. I'm an intern for Representative Brown. I'm going to go to the University of Florida next year and major in marketing.
Hello, my name is Gregory Fordstrom. I am a junior majoring in political science at the University of Wyoming, and the career that I would like to attain in the future is one as a legislative aide, so this is perfect practice. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm Liberty Zavorka. I'm from Torrington, Wyoming. I go to Eastern Wyoming College there. I'm currently majoring in social sciences, but I hope to go to the university next year and do international studies.
Okay.
Good morning, I'm Lily McNally. I'm originally from Missouri, and I'm pursuing a degree in teaching, but I recently switched that to political science to pursue law school. So.
Hi, I'm Cole Castle, going to UW here, and I plan on pursuing law. And thank you guys for having us.
Well, interns, thank you. Yeah. Go right down. Go right down. Split and go down the aisle. You guys go that way. The House will come to order. Once again, I'd like to thank all the interns for their hard work this session. It's great to see young kids watching politics and becoming involved. See if we have any other issues. So I think our next order of business is going to be veto override. Well, let's do Journal Committee report and get that out of the way.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 28th, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
All right, we're now at that order of business of veto overrides. And Mr. Majority, roll call. Okay, Please finish roll call.
Harshman? Sixty present, 2 excused.
So just a note before we're in our next order of business. So you'll notice that Representative Byron is gone, and he went home because his wife is expecting and getting real close, like maybe today or tomorrow. So we want to wish him the best.
I have a card ready for the baby in my desk.
Okay. And Representative Sherwood has a card for the baby and the family, if anybody would like to sign that. So sometime today, maybe just stop by and jot your name down on that. Wish him well. With that, we are at that order of business of veto overrides on the budget. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Article 4, Section 8 and 9 of the Wyoming Constitution, I move the House of Representatives override the governor's veto of various items or parts of House Enrolled Act Number 37 being original House Bill Number 1. I further move that the House consider and vote separately on each item or part of the governor's veto identified in the list distributed to the members. First motion for consideration of veto is to override the governor's veto of language and on page 16, limited to vetoed language of footnote 3 in Section 2, Section 20, Department of Environmental Quality.
So, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I think I've got a little space in there before you make that motion, and then we'll redo that. I got to do my little piece in there. And so just so everybody knows, the veto messages are online on the right side of the bill page under the digest, just like the concurrence messages. So if you all want to see those, you can go there on your computer to see them. So the motion to override the governor's veto of House Enrolled Act Number 51 being original House Bill Number 1 is in order. We will consider and vote separately on each item or part of the governor's veto identified in the list distributed to the members. The vote to override requires a 2/3 majority of the members elected. Now, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, maybe make that motion one more time.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I move to override the governor's veto of language on page 16, limited to vetoed language of footnote 3 in Section 2, Section 20, Department of Environmental Quality.
The motion is motion number 1, to override the governor's veto of language on page 16, limited to vetoed language of footnote 3 in Section 2, Section 02, Department of Environmental Quality. The chief clerk will please call is there any debate? Any debate? Any debate? Chief clerk will please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron, excused. Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman, excused. Oh, Harshman, excused to I. Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Provenza? No to aye. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion number 1, which was to override the governor's veto of language on page 16, limited to vetoed language of footnote 3 in section 2, section 020, Department of Environmental Quality. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Article 4, Section 8 and 9 of the Wyoming Constitution, I move that the House of Representatives override the governor's veto of various items or parts of House Enrolled Act Number 37, being original House Bill Number 1. I further move that the House consider and vote separately on each item or part of the governor's veto identified in the list distributed to the members.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I think from here on out, we just go down and you do each motion. So if you'll just, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, if you'll make motion number 2.
Mr. Speaker, I move to override the governor's veto of language on page 21 of the footnote 2 and section 2, section 37, state engineer.
The motion is to override the governor's veto of language on page 21 of footnote 2 and section 2, section 37, state engineer. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Elliman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron, excused. Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Harrelson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermueller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? I'm sorry, repeat. Speaker Summers?
Aye.
Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 60 aye, 1 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion number 2, which is the language on page 21 of footnote 2 in section 2, section 37, state engineer. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move motion number 3 to override the governor's veto of language on page 42 of footnote 11 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming.
The motion is to override the governor's veto of language on page 42 of footnote 11 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming. The chief clerk will please call the roll. Representative Jennings on motion 3.
Mr. Speaker, I know that we've read these motions and stuff like that, but for the people at home that are listening and stuff, could we get just a really brief what we're voting on? Just really brief.
Yeah, Vice Chairman Larson, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and didn't quite know how to do that, and I'm happy to help with that. So on this motion, what the legislature had done is approved $2 million to be split up, $1.5 and $0.5 million to the University of Wyoming's WYGIS, which oversees the the GIS stuff to do some modeling and at a specified amount, 2-foot digital contours. What the governor done is line item through language, but left the $2 million in there for the university to use without the direction that we intended. And so we feel that the language in there to tell them what we want to do is important. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I was on the wrong ones. Mr. Chairman, I apologize to the public and to the world as a whole, really. Mr. Chairman, this is going on to the positions that we wanted for the state health lab. And we have been requesting that state lab get the quality and the level of people that we need there for some time. The pathologist positions, they continue to be vacant, and so we got fairly prescriptive on what we wanted them to do in this footnote of the budget bill. The governor strikes out what positions we want them to do, but leaves the funding in there, which hence would allow the university to basically use the funding for whatever they would want to use it for. Again, my apologies for confusing everyone.
The motion is motion number 3 to override the governor's veto of language on page 42 of footnote 11 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron, excused. Chadwick? Jestick? Clouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanzer Dan? Zwanzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion number 3, the language on page 42 of footnote 11 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to override the governor's veto of language on page 43 and 44 of footnote 14 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming.
Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for those who are watching, this was some funding and opportunity we had to get some GIS information through some LiDAR technology available, and there was a pretty limited way that we wanted this to come in to the state. The problem is the state is really struggling with on how to administer GIS, and so we wanted to park this initially at WIGIS, which is at the University of Wyoming, and we appropriated the funds, but still wanted to do it as to capture this opportunity. The governor struck out the language defining how we wanted it done, left the $2 million in there, which arguably is then left for the university to use without description.
The motion is motion 4 to override the governor's veto of language on pages 43 and 44 of footnote 14 in section 2, section 67 of the University of Wyoming. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Ellerman. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron excused. Chadwick. Chestick. Klauston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Harrelson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanzer Dan. Zwanzer Dave. Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Larson Lloyd? No. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 59 aye, 2 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion number 4, which was to override the governor's veto of language on pages 43 and 44 of footnote 14 in section 2, section 67, University of Wyoming. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move motion number 5 to override the governor's veto of language on page 50, limited to vetoed language of footnote 5 in section 2, section 101, Supreme Court.
Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the public can better understand, when we started the budget conversations this year, the Supreme Court had requested an attorney position to help them to give guidance to judges on federal requirements, such as the ADA requirements around for courts to comply with. In our round robin, first we didn't approve that position, and then in the round robin, after the Chief Justice put us in a headlock, we agreed that we would go ahead and fund that position, and we even relaxed that a little bit and just said she could use a position for whatever she wanted, the attorney position. And so it was their request to have an attorney. Here, the governor vetoes that it has to be a staff attorney and just says it can be a full-time employee at the discretion of the Supreme Court. And what we're saying as legislature is, you ask for an attorney, we expect it to be an attorney.
The motion is motion 5 to override the governor's veto of language. Oh,
Yeah, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So reading the governor's veto message, it said that they corroborated with the judicial branch on exercising this veto. I would love to hear if the Appropriations Committee had any conversation with the judicial branch on why they worked together to veto this.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During our conversation about this, we talked about hiring, one of the purposes of this position would be to assess ADA requirements and things like that. I'm not sure that we want to limit it to an attorney type of position. Maybe we want to leave this open to whatever the judicial branch thinks that they might need for this particular purpose. Thank you.
Representative Walters for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and in support of this override. And when this came to the Appropriations Committee to begin with, from this Agency 101, the Supreme Court, it was to be an attorney to aid the court in determining the needs of federal requirements such as ADA and everything else. That is what we put in originally in this body. Then through the conference committee, we visited with the court once again, and they said, really, that's probably about a 6-month job. We'll have most of those things ironed out, and then it'll just be an occasional, throughout every year, need to update. So we said, what will the person do in the meantime? And they said, well, just be another staff attorney for our staff. And so we said, in our conference committees, we said, okay, sounds great. Let's just open it up, and instead of saying being this specific type of staff attorney, you'll just be a general staff attorney. And now the governor is making it just a general position anywhere within that agency. And so that's how this position has evolved. We believe it's wise to take it back to a staff attorney. And I think, while I can't speak for the court, I think that we are meeting the intention that they originally saw in the desire for this position.
Representative Stiff for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, members, I think this veto override is important because if we don't do this, then they still get the money, they still get an employee, but the court could then hire, instead of hiring a staff attorney, they could hire a cellist to play music during the oral argument. They could hire a florist to spread rose petals before their feet, as they enter the chambers. You know, I think it's important for us to say, hey, you asked for an attorney, you get an attorney. On and forth. Thank you.
Anybody else? For the first, second, Representative Larson for your second time.
So what is interesting in these veto overrides, in some that you've seen that we've already overrode, is we didn't put these positions in of our own volition. They come to us as a request, and they said, this is what we want. Their argument was fair. They said they wanted a staff attorney. We said, okay. I got a hole in the elbow and I can't wear it anymore. Sorry, I was distracted by the good chairman of education. Wanted to know where my camel coat was. And so we've complied. We thought we were doing the right thing by saying, okay, executive branch, judicial branch, you have this need as specified. We accommodated that. The governor, bless his heart, he just says, you know, and he just is very tender about that. He's, you know, that's for us to decide. And as the good former speaker said last night, sometimes that's fair, but when we, as the appropriators and legislature, we also have some say in this, and we're pushing back and saying, this is what you asked for. We expect it to be as you ask.
The motion is motion number 5 to override the governor's veto of language on page 50, limited to vetoed language of footnote 5 in section 2, section 101 Supreme Court. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Elliman, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron excused, Chadwick, Chestick, Clauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Harrelson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Warnock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storr, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washut, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanitzer Dan, Zwanitzer Dave, Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Chestick? Chadwick? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 59 aye, 2 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion 5, which was to override the governor's veto of language on page 50, limited to vetoed language of footnote 5 in section 2, section 101, Supreme Court. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move motion number 6 to override the governor's veto of language on page 66, limited to vetoed language of subsection C in section 3, section 328, enterprise inflation.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for those who are watching, in section 328 of the budget bill, the governor had requested, the budget aid department had come in and they had looked at all the agency inflation impacts over the last year and felt like just for the general operation of the agencies that there was an impact on the standard budget that we placed last year. And so they requested some additional funds to, so that they would stay whole and be able to operate in the normal operations of state government. There was about 14, 16, about $17 million that went out to all state agencies in an aggregate. And in the request for approving that in the supplemental budget, the governor had then requested that it be ongoing and included in their standard budget moving forward. The Joint Appropriations Committee felt like this supplemental request ought to just be for this fiscal year only, and then let the agencies come back, have that supplemental request, if needed, be part of their request in the standard budget process next year. So in what the governor line itemed out was the language that we said that it would not be moving forward, that it not be included in their standard budget. So overriding this makes it one-time funding and requires the agencies to reevaluate and look and see if this inflation funding is warranted, and then to plead that case in a request before appropriations in our budget process next year.
Anyone want to speak? The motion is motion number 6 to override the governor's veto of language on page 66, limited to vetoed language of subsection C in section 3, section 328, enterprise inflation. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Allemand, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, excused, Chadwick, Chestick, Clauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hornock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storer, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washut, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanitzer Dan, Zwanitzer Dave, Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 60 aye, 1 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of motion number 6, which was to override the governor's veto of language on page 66, limited to vetoed languages of subsection C in section 3, section 328, enterprise inflation. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Article 4, Section 8 and 9 of the Wyoming Constitution, I move that the House override the governor's veto of Senate Enrolled Act Number 37, being original Senate File Number 71, State Loan and Bond Programs.
Motion to override the governor's veto of Senate Enrolled Act Number 37, being original Senate File Number 71, is in order. The vote to override is debatable and requires a two-thirds majority of the members elected. Is there any debate? Representative Walters. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not debating it, just to remind the body that this bill passed out of here on a 62-0 vote. And what this does, it reduces the amount in a lot of these loan programs down. And the purpose for reduces the amount that we've set aside for these loan programs down. And the reason for doing that is so that we make more money available to be invested more aggressively, to make our dollars work harder for us here in the state of Wyoming, while still leaving money available for these loans. And really, the number is set at an amount a little higher than the current usage. So there is room for expansion within these loan programs. But again, to try and be able to take some of that money and put it into more long-term investments, generating a greater rate of return, and that's the purpose of this bill. So any other questions, happy to answer them, and ask for your favorable consideration in this vote.
The motion is to override the governor's veto of Senate Enrolled Act Number 37, Enrolled Act Number 37, being original Senate File Number 71. The chief clerk will please call the roll. Technology, isn't it wonderful? We will continue to stand at ease until the machine works, I guess.
Allemand, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, excused, Chadwick, Chestick, Clauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hornock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, I'm sorry, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stiff, Storer, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washut, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanitzer Dan, Zwanitzer Dave, Speaker Summers.
No.
Are there any changes? Northrup, aye to no. Further changes? Washut, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 55 aye, 6 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to override the governor's veto of Senate Enrolled Act number 37, being original Senate file number 71. Excuse me. All right, did we have a privilege of the floor somewhere? Did we have a Chairman Eklund that might have some good folks from his community here? Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Speaker, so earlier I introduced a fourth grade class and it was the wrong class. It was Mr. Anderson's group. This is Christina Patterson's. She's the teacher of this fourth grade class at Burns Elementary from home. Hey!
Welcome to the House. Does anybody else have a privilege of the floor? Okay. We are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the third reading consent list consisting of the following Senate files. Senate File Number 76, Senate File 99, Senate File 127, Senate File 147, Senate File 151, Senate File 152, Senate File 153, Senate File 164, and Senate File 167.
Would anyone like any of the bills removed from the consent list? Representative Brown.
Mr. Speaker, Senate File 151 does have an amendment on it, so it should not be on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Representative Brown. Anybody else would anybody else like to remove a bill from the consent list? Will a reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
Senate File 76, sponsored by Blockchain, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, an act relating to digital assets being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 99, sponsored by Senator Barlow, witnessing of wills, remote methods, an act relating to wills being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 127, sponsored by Blockchain, Wyoming Stable Token Act, an act relating to trade and commerce being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 147, sponsored by Senator Anderson, Government Contracts, Labor Organization, an act relating to public works and contracts being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 152, sponsored by Senator Pappas, Occupational Therapist, Criminal History, an act relating to criminal history records being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 153, sponsored by Senator Boner, Election Security, an act relating to elections being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 164, sponsored by Senator Boner, Public Improvement Contract Requirements Amendments, an act relating to cities and towns being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 167, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance, an act relating to domestic violence protection being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Elleman, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, excused, Chadwick, Chestick, Klauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hornock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storer, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washut, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanitzer Dan, Zwanitzer Dave, Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? As for Senate File 76, are there any changes? Zwanitzer Dave, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Crago, aye to no. Alaman, aye to no. Pendergraft, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Ward, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Rodriguez Williams, aye to no. Angelos, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Henderson, aye to no. Further changes? Locke, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 40 aye, 21 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 99, are there any changes? Pendergraft? Aye to no. Locke? Aye to no. Allemand? Aye to no. Hornock? Aye to no. Penn? Aye to no. Smith? Aye to no. Slagle? Aye to no. Stivar? Aye to no. Bear? Aye to no. Strock? Aye to no. Winter? Aye to no. Knapp? Aye to no. Jennings? Aye to no. Heiner? Aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Ottman? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 46 aye, 15 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 127, are there any changes? Chestick? Aye to no. Swannitzer Dave? Aye to no. Henderson? Aye to no. Crago? Aye to no. Banks? Aye to no. Washut? Aye to no. Locke? Aye to no. Pendergraft? Aye to no. Northrup? Aye to no. Allemand? Aye to no. Jennings? Aye to no. Heiner? Aye to no. Knapp? Aye to no. Sorry. Winter? Aye to no. Rodriguez Williams? Aye to no. Strock? Aye to no. Ward? Aye to no. Haroldson? Aye to no. Smith? Aye to no. Slagle? Aye to no. Stivar? Aye to no. Penn? Aye to no. Ottman? Aye to no. Thank you. Storer? Aye to no. Summers? Aye to no. Further changes? Further changes? Henderson, can you repeat? No. Closing vote. Vote closed. 36 aye, 25 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 147, are there any changes? Storer, aye to no. Sherwood, aye to no. Conrad, aye to no. Chestick, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Trujillo, aye to no. Zwonitzer Dan, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Further changes? Henderson, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 52 aye, 9 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 152, are there any changes? Locke, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Elemand, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Ottman, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 49 aye, 12 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 153, are there any changes? Storer, aye to no. Sherwood, aye to no. Chestick, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 56 aye, 5 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 164, are there any changes? Larson Lloyd, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Further changes? Speaker Summers, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 57 aye, 4 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 167, are there any changes? Stith, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Elemand, aye to no. Brown, aye to no. Further changes? Further changes. Closing vote. Vote closed. 53 aye, 8 no, 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate Files 76, 99, 127, 147, 152, 153, 164, and 167 have passed the House. We're at that order of business of bills on third reading regular list. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 72.
Senate File 72, sponsored by Senator Larson. Employee forced microchip implantation prohibited. An act relating to labor and employment being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have amendments. Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I move amendment, reading 3, amendment number 1 to Senate File 72. And what this amendment does is it deletes the reading 2, amendment number 1 to Senate File 72. And as all this amendment did yesterday that was added on, is it added on a code from the Code of Federal Regulation. And basically that particular code, so Title 9, which is what the code was, the title for the Title IX title or subject is animals and animal products. I'd like to think that that's not the right place for us. And the Part 86, which was what was added to this bill, is titled Animal Disease Traceability. So I understand that the intent might have been to add some regulation that we probably needed to comply with, but quite frankly, that certainly is not it. So my amendment is just to delete that from this Senate File 72 bill, which is as most of you know, is the microchip implant prohibited bill. And I ask for your favorable consideration, and please vote aye on this this amendment so we can get this out of this bill. It doesn't belong here. Thank you.
Representative Western for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge the body to vote no on this amendment. Maybe it belongs in there, maybe it doesn't, but the bill is written right now. There's no language in there adhering to compliance of federal regulations. Sure, Section 6 might not be the best one, but in lieu of anything better, I think that's our best option. Right now, we have no way of knowing, are we in compliance or out of compliance at any of these federal regs that do monitor this technology. So I'm certainly open to alternatives, but having something in place is certainly better than leaving us entirely open to being out of compliance with federal regulations. So on and against.
Representative Slago for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against, or on and for this amendment. We fought in the cattle industry not to have our cattle RFID'd and tracked across the country. We don't need to do this to humans. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Nyman for your first time.
Follow up, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To follow up on what the last speaker said, this body passed a piece of legislation 2 years ago, and my first opportunity to be able to pass legislation was the Livestock Protection Act. It was to allow land property or livestock owners to be able to choose how they want to have their livestock identified. This is in the livestock industry, just so you understand, and what we passed is a very real pressure coming down from the federal government right now to be able to trace and to provide traceability in livestock. And we've talked a little bit about the different issues that come up with it. Well, in the livestock industry, we have 5 packers in this United States of America, 4 of which are foreign owned, and they are pushing very hard for traceability if you want to sell your livestock. So, and I know when we're talking about human beings here, we think, that'll never happen. I understand that. And it is, I don't want to get crazy here. But the reality of it is, in the livestock industry, there is a major push by our USDA to try to undermine the findings that were found in 2012 when they allowed livestock
let's
producers
stick
to do
on
it.
the
So,
amendment.
yeah, I know. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I shouldn't get off in the weeds. But it's just the point is, folks, there is a move. And human beings there are things that they're out there in the wings that are wanting to identify us. So I know it's not happening right now, but don't fool yourself to think that this is not in the wings, because we're fighting it right now in the livestock industry. So on and for this amendment.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out what was just spoken of by the Majority Whip. He rightly said that this particular statute, if we pass this bill, will possibly be in conflict with federal law. The problem is that this body has not debated nearly enough how preemption should work. And by preemption, I mean whether the federal government has authority over the state and the people within the state and our laws, or whether we have the authority. And if we carefully look at the Constitution, we'll see that the federal government is very limited. And they constantly use the Interstate Commerce Clause. So let's just take this particular bill as an example, inserting chips into employees. How would that affect interstate commerce where the federal government would have some authority? I don't see it. I don't see anywhere where this body does not have a responsibility to address the issue if we feel it's an important enough issue. Others have talked to that importance, but I want to remind the body that preemption is something that we must address on a regular basis. If we don't, we will lose our own authority to determine what the state's policies are on and for the amendment and the bill.
Representative Knapp for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment, for the bill, obviously in trying to connect something, there is no federal regulation concerning this law that we would like to pass. And this is happening today. In the land of brats and chocolate, there's over 2,000 people currently chipped. In other nations, there are some people chipped that don't want to be. Right now, it's pretty much for financial reasons, and it's voluntary with those people. However, I can see a day where this law will come in very handy in preempting what would be forced chips. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to go back to specifically this amendment and just keep it simple. The bottom line is this Code of Federal Regulation is very specifically for animals. I'd like to think this body does not look at this whole issue and implanting in humans having anything to do with us tracking, in this case, animal disease trackability. So on and for this amendment, and I ask for your aye vote on this amendment.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 72 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 72 has been adopted. Representatives Wanitz or Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 and ask for your favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, what this amendment does, it leaves in the fact that we do not want companies coming to Wyoming that wants to put implants into their employees. And it pretty much gets rid of all the rest, which is, well, if you want to have one and sign consent. So my discussion would be is we, as has been mentioned earlier, have not seen any evidence of anybody that I'm aware of in the United States we have seen some evidence in Wyoming, let me recreate that, that this has been a problem. And so I'm just simply going to put the bill that says, hey, we don't want you to come in. Now, if we see evidence that we have some of this type of behavior that's going to happen, within a year, we can get a bill put together and then we can more define what it is that we want to do. Once we have some figures, facts, that we have some of the things that say this is a good reason to implant them or it's not a good reason. For those companies who want to keep track of their employees, I think it's the right thing to do to put some sort of portable device and they can take it off when they get home. What I'm a little against is putting an implant that you can't take out. You do not know for sure what that chip is going to keep track of. Now, if it's a health field and you want a chip, great. But for employment, and if you take it off and you happen to leave it at the wrong place, and when it turns back on the next morning and your employer finds out that you're someplace that is somewhat suspicious. So anyway, that there is my argument, and I would stand for discussion. And the fine speaker that just spoke before, we had a great discussion on this and looking forward toward a little more debate. Thank you.
Representative Locke for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me just start with this, and I actually appreciate one of the statements made by the bringer of this amendment from a certain perspective that we really don't want businesses chipping people. That statement is absolutely accurate, and I do think this is a good discussion to have. However, one of the things that this bill does, or excuse me, that this amendment does do, is it takes some sections out of this bill that I think are important, because I think, as we have discussed numerous bills here, we've been very careful not to get in the way of businesses. And the individual freedom component of this, I'm trying not to get in the way as well. I would probably argue we don't want businesses to chip people at all. I would agree with that. But if a business said, we would really like to offer up the ability to chip to simplify you coming to work, if you will, or whatever. It's really up to that individual to choose that, in my mind. Do I think it's a great thing or a smart thing? I would argue no. That being said, that's not my decision for anybody else in this room or in our state. So what this bill actually does is it continues to allow, what this amendment removes is the ability to allow businesses to offer this option, but it also puts protection. So as you go in here to pages 4 and 5 and 6, those sections that are removed, what this is protections for the requirements for the employer and protections for the employee who actually choose to accept the chip. So a microchip, if they so chose that. So this just put protections in there. For example, it requires a consent. It allows a removal option if they so choose that. It actually allows, it actually requires disclosure to the employee. So we talked yesterday about the fact that these chips could just be tracking devices, but the technology is that these chips can do much, much more than that in terms of even collecting your personal health information. So this puts a disclosure in here and requires disclosure that you understand, if you choose this, you understand the data that's there, what they plan to do with that data, right? And gives you that option to fully understand what this chip does and how it's going to affect you in your life. So I think it's really important that this portion stay in the bill. So I'm on and against the amendment just to make sure that there's a broad set of protections for the individual. It gives the individual the right. I don't want it, or I do want it. But if you choose to receive that chip, then if I want to make sure there are an appropriate protections for you. And I want to throw this out. You guys are very aware of this. People sometimes for their job will say, well, I think my boss wants me to do this, so to keep my job, I'll do it. That being said, even if they make it for that reason, which we might agree is a wrong reason, we give them some protections. So again, on and against this amendment and for the bill.
Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment. I've been down here, as you have, for a couple of months. I think I was home once, but when I get home, there's going to be a big stack of mail. And I go through that mail, and I will wager you that I will find at least one and probably several letters from various agencies that have information on me, and they have to do a kind of a privacy disclosure. This is what we do with your information. It's mandated by law that I have an understanding of what that information is and what they do with it. And so therefore, I think it's appropriate, in keeping with this pattern, that any employee who does choose to do this, and if they want to do it, great, but that they understand the ramifications, they understand the information that's there, that's being tracked, and a full disclosure is important. So I would not take this out of this bill. Thanks.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Zwanitzer Dave for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the body has a good concept of what this amendment's trying to do. But as I'm sitting here thinking, it doesn't have an age limit. So how do we handle that? Do we have to have the parents' permission if you want to work at one of the big stores? There's just so many what ifs, and the fine sponsor has tried to address some of the what ifs, but I see a lot more what-ifs out there. And I think we can just do a much better job legislating here in the state of Wyoming once we know what we're up against. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask for your favorable consideration on this amendment.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 72 has failed. The next amendment for our consideration, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 72 and ask for the body's favorable consideration. Really, this is just an attempt to, what I think, try to make the bill constitutional. If you look in your Constitution, Article 1, Section 35 regards ex post facto laws. Essentially, we as the legislature can't create a law that impairs an existing contract. And so what this amendment says is if there is, we don't know, we've heard testimony, we've heard discussion that this isn't happening, but just in case it is, because I don't think if somebody was microchipping their employees, they're going to show up to the legislature and tell us about it. They're probably not going to say, hey, I got all my people microchipped. And so I just want to make sure if there's any existing contracts out there that we are covering that and we're making the law constitutional with the amendment. And with that, I would stand for any questions, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Locke for your first time.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually just seeing this amendment. And I'm based on kind of what I have seen, or I haven't had much of an opportunity to review this. That being said, I think the bill speaks for itself. I'm on and against this amendment. I think that the bill covers protections for both the individual and the business. And again, on and against the amendment.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Ward for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a question. If no one is microchipping, why is this amendment necessary? On and against.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Davis for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the good bringer of this amendment, is this similar to like a grandfather clause that may exist earlier? So it's just clarifying that.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Craigo, bring us home.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just to respond to a couple of the things. One, it is like a grandfather clause, to answer the last question first. That's what we're saying is, because if it already does exist, we, per the Constitution, can't go in and affect that contract. If there's a contract between an employee and employer, and they've already agreed to do this, we can't override that per the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. So that's all I'm trying to get at. The other question about why is this amendment needed, I suppose the same could be said about the bill. But what we're trying to do is get to a place where the bill as written is constitutional, nothing more, nothing less. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 72 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 72 has been adopted. Senate File 72 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Ellerman? Excused? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron, excused. Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Harrelson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? I'm sorry, Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? I'm sorry, Sherwood, repeat. Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers?
No.
Are there any changes? Davis? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 28 aye, 32 no, 2 excused.
Senate File 72, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 72 has failed to pass the House. Representative Larson Lloyd, you have a privilege.
I do have a privilege, if I may, Mr. Speaker.
Please go ahead.
So in the gallery, a good friend and a past member of this body, Scott Ratliff, who's from Riverton and served in this body from 1980 to 1992, was probably, well, he was probably one of the first ones that represented a tribal interests here on the floor, and then has helped with our congressional delegation nationally for, since he left that time. So Scott, you're a good guy. Thank you for all you do. Please step in and let us welcome you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the privilege of the floor. I compliment whoever put this building together because it's beautiful. It's something to be proud of. I won't take very long. I would tell you that we don't make very big marks while we're down here, except the friendships that we make, and they're everlasting. And so pay attention to your friends, because you'll love them for the rest of your life. I'm honored to get to stand before you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice seeing you again, and Lloyd, thank you, and the rest of the Fremont County delegation for allowing me this privilege. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. So I've run into Scotty in a lot of things, from the Cowboy Hall of Fame to the State Board of Education. Scotty's done a wonderful job out there for Wyoming, including raised quite a few quarter horses. So Scotty, thank you for your service to Wyoming. We really appreciate you. Thank you. Speaker Pro Tem Stith, could you come take the helm here for a bit while I do something else?
The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 94.
Senate File 94, sponsored by Senator Ellis. Federal Indian Child Welfare Act codification, an act relating to domestic relations being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have an amendment. Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 94, and I will withdraw it at the proper time. Members, I just wanted to give us another chance to debate this a little bit. We have set up a task force that I really think we need to give them a lot of leeway and allow them the flexibility to make some decisions for us. So by enacting this bill, I think we really limit the scope of what that task force and the relevance and importance of that task force. So I really just want to kind of for us to take a look at this again. What the task force needs to do is tailor what we should do for our children in this situation, tailor it to Wyoming, tailor it to the reservations that we have, to the tribes that we have here in Wyoming, and figure this out for Wyoming, for our state. So if we don't pass this bill right now, really nothing changes. So we are still abiding by the federal system, the federal ICWA laws, and I think we need to give some time to wait for, to see what the Supreme Court decides on this situation, and let the task force tailor what they do to what's going on here, and bring us a bill to figure it out in the next year or two, rather than having this as the template. Let's give the task force a lot of leeway on this one so that they can get it right for the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would urge you to resist this amendment. The point of having both is the ICWA bill would act as a bridge while the task force evaluates whatever holes have been identified in the law over the past, since 1978, and allow for things to continue, maintain the status quo until we can figure out where this state really wants to take this. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitzer Dan, for your
Thank you,
first
Mr.
time.
Thank you. Against the amendment for the bill, and that has kind of changed in my mindset as this process because of the amendment that the former speaker put on, that there is a sunset. But when we talk about this task force that we have done and is initiated, the question, if we don't have this, is where do they start? This at least gives them a starting place saying, hey, we're taking the federal law, we're going to look at it, what parts need to fit Wyoming, what needs to be changed. Otherwise, if the highest court in the land, makes a decision, and we don't know what decision they'll make, it could be remanded, any number of things could happen. It could be delayed, right? And so we're kind of in this game where we know we need to start the process. I think the best place to start the process is, hey, let's start with the federal law. How does it affect Wyoming? We can carve it out piece by piece, but that's easier to do than saying the field is wide open. I think we'll probably do that anyway. If we defeated this bill, we'd still be starting with the federal ICWA law and saying, how do we make it work for Wyoming? I think this is easier in case the court does something really interesting we're not even thinking of. We at least have this in place. We get to follow that law while we figure out how to unwind it and make a Wyoming solution. So I think at this time, with the sunset date we've put on, as long as that stays in, this is probably the best option going forward. So would appreciate you defeating the amendment and voting in favor of the bill.
Representative Slagle for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against this bill, I feel that we discussed it in the past. This bill is for the protection of the tribe's rights. It has nothing in it about the protection of children. In this body, we have talked quite a bit on protecting our children, especially the unborn. But now we aren't even mentioning the protection of the children that are born. And so on and against this bill. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the bill. I am inclined to resist any bill that gives any preference to any race on any subject at any time. Well, why do I say that? Page 13 of this bill, when we're talking about the priority of where to place a child, mentions race in item I, line 1. The focus should be on the family. Any child when placed, if we can place it within the family, I think that's the best move. It's the best move for a lot of reasons. Culture was mentioned the other day, and different families, even among the same race, different families have different cultures. And I like the idea of being able to try to stay within that boundary. The second item there kind of echoes that thought. It maybe not related by blood, but the culture is the same. And I relate to that. I think that's a good guide. But I begin to have a little bit of heartburn at line 6, where it says other Indian families. I think at that point, we begin to cross the line where we're giving preference to a race. We're not necessarily considering all the cultural aspects. I know that not every tribe is the same. Not every culture between them are alike. And that preference is given before any other placement. Our focus needs to be, as the good bringer of this amendment stated, to keep it as wide as possible and not to hem in people. We can't foresee the circumstances of any particular child. And it may indeed be that down the road there's a case where another option of any other placement would be preferable to all of those involved, but this law would stand in the way. And I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to give the liberty, we need to give the freedom to the people that are dealing with this child's placement. Yes, they need to give some consideration to culture, to history, to background, to family, all of those things. Absolutely, that would come into play. I just don't want to see us exclude an option at any time.
Chairman Brown for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I see the big burly bear from the Fremont County area wanting to get up and speak. But ladies and gentlemen, I've heard it 2 or 3 times just in the last speech and then one other speech that this is regarding race. And I want to make sure that we step back just for a half a second and realize that these are sovereign tribes. This isn't necessarily about the race issue. This is about granting those rights to the sovereign tribes and giving them their rights, not because of a race or skin tone or anything along those lines. And any implication of such is not at all what we're trying to do. So I just want to be careful when we say things here. You know, we're on the cameras, we're on the tube of view, and we're saying some stuff out here it's not about race. This is about maintaining what we have. You know, yeah, it's putting it into state law, but I personally applaud the task force and honestly, I truly value the work that has gone into this by the chairman of the Tribal Relations Chairman. He's done some amazing work with this. So on and against this amendment and for the bill.
Mr. Speaker for your first time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On and against the amendment in support of the bill. You know, we've had I guess a checkered past with the tribes over the course of our entire history. And I think so. I think it's important that at this time we support those tribes, and we support particularly the children of those tribes and the culture that they come in. And so with that, I would stand for this bill and against this amendment.
Representative Larson Lloyd for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting, as we had some representatives from NCSL here earlier in the session. I spoke to them, and one of the things that I just think we are extremely deficient on is an understanding of sovereignty, tribal rights, things that come here and try to vote on. And we don't have anything in place with maybe I shouldn't have said that, I apologize, but any of those organizations that we belong to that are really there to help us. They have some to help tribal members who come into the legislature. But when, from those of us from Fremont County, Hot Springs County, when we come down here and we get talking about tribal issues, it's fun to watch you, my colleagues, because it's oftentimes like, how does that work? And how does that, it's such an interesting concept. And this, to the point of one of the past speakers, is this idea of race and sovereignty. And it's been spoke of by the last speaker and this, and it's one of the challenges that frankly the bill has in place is ICWA given preference to race, or is it having respect for sovereignty? And that will be decided. But I would like you to contemplate a little bit, if you as an American citizen are in, pick the country, okay, and your rights have been violated, the American embassy is contacted and they say, whoa, time out. That's one of our citizens and he has rights under our Constitution and you can't treat him as such unless you violated a law or something to that effect. And we get pretty cranky when they don't treat our citizens like they need to be treated. It's not unlike, and contemplate this, so we have these treaties with the various tribes, and the treaties certainly vary. But with those treaties, we're saying we respect your right to exist as a sovereign nation within a nation for which you now belong. So you're a citizen of these United States. If you're a Wyoming tribe, you're a citizen of the state of Wyoming, and yet you have this sovereignty that's granted to you by virtue of your treaty. And so what ICWA was put in place to do was to push back on those efforts to assimilate Indian children into our culture and to take into consideration the existing culture of various tribes that exist. And so when this child comes before, or family comes before a district court, and action may be that the child is removed from that home, what's in the best interest of the child, which goes back to this conversation on respecting the child. What's in the best interest of that child? Is it placing him in this home over here in southern part of our state that has all of these wonderful amenities that we're used to? Or is it right to put him back with his grandmother or aunt or uncle that maybe have 5 children sleeping in one bedroom? I argue that it may very well be back with his family rather than with somebody else, so that they can maintain the culture and the ties to family that exist. And so ICWA, and I paint kind of 2 pictures. One, we had 4 children in one bedroom, so I get it. We need to be careful then that we're not trying to take away the ability of these tribes to act within what they perceive as a sovereign right to act by virtue of their treaty. Now, it was said, and that's fair, why the task force is important and we need to tailor this to Wyoming. I agree with that. We need to tailor this to fit our statutes, but it's not just a Wyoming thing. It's not just about our tribes, the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes that live in Wyoming. It's for any enrolled Indian child, enrolled meaning in their respective tribe, regardless of origin in the United States, that is, while in Wyoming, finds himself in a state court, so that their respective tribe has a say in the disposition of that child along with the state court. What is the best interest? So we've gone to their consulate and they're saying, our child we have some rights here too. So what will the Supreme Court do? Why do we need it now? We don't know. If the Supreme Court does nothing, you're right, we probably wouldn't need this in place. But if the Supreme Court does do something and changes it, then by what law do we administer the child protective services of those Indian children from whatever tribe they come from in our state courts? Default is state. We just handle like any other child, okay? We have some history there. The history that ICWA was intended to mitigate. And so we're trying to exercise caution that we don't let the pendulum swing back too far. It's a bridge with time limit on it to allow the task force then to work to say what is the Wyoming fix for how this works. And it sunsets. Hopefully we've got something in place by then to do it. So I hope that I've answered some of those questions, because I still think as we talk about the impacts on the tribes and the rights of the tribes and race versus political, I get all of that, and we're trying to navigate our way through that. And so I would encourage you to resist this amendment and vote for the bill. What is the negative impact of adopting this bill? My argument is nothing, because we're already complying by that law now and have been since 1978. So again, please resist the amendment, and would request and ask for your vote on the bill.
Representative Ward, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment and against the bill. In all other circumstances, a court is required to consider the best interest of the child above all else. So whether you call this race-based or political consideration, it should always come after the best interest of the child. The very reason this is in front of the Supreme Court is to question whether it's about race or political class. I urge support the amendment, no on the bill.
Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their second time? Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good discussion. When I am going to another country, so we disagree a little bit about the sovereignty issue. When I go to another country, I do abide by their laws. I don't abide by American laws when I'm in another country. But we'll disagree with some of that sovereignty issue. But members, this is actually great, because we all agree that we need to do the right thing for the kids. We all agree on that. None of us are discounting that here. How we get there is what we're debating. So it's good. We've had, kids join us today. And I want you to keep those kids in mind as you vote for this, because all of the kids we're talking about in this bill, none of them are going to vote for any of us. So it's not about whether or not we're going to win a vote by voting for this or voting against this. This is about what's proper and right for the kids, what we're going to do for the children here. I just argued that it's important to give the task force as much leeway with this as they can, because they'll be able to figure it out. And we need to tailor something to Wyoming. We need to wait to see where the highest court in the land lands on this, and then we'll go from there. I think that is what is really important here, but we all agree this is very, very important for the kids, and we can all appreciate that. So vote your conscience, please, when it comes to this bill. It will make a difference in the lives of a child or two on this. It will, it really will. So at this time, I withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
The amendment is withdrawn. Senate File 94, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Elleman? Excused. Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron excused. Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Harrelton? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stiff?
No.
Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Aye. Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanzer Dan? Zwanzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Andrew? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 39 aye, 21 no, 2 excused.
Senate File 94, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 94 has passed the House. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move the House stand in recess until 2 p.m.
Committee announcements. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. Your House Appropriations will meet with our fellows down the hall at noon tomorrow to work on interim topics. And ladies and gentlemen, the crab night will be tomorrow night, right between 5:30 or 6, depending on how late we go. And you're all welcome to come, and please bring your whoever you want. It'll be a good time. So, crab.
Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Joint Committee on Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions will meet upon this noon recess in room E005 to consider interim topics.
Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Conference Committee for House Bill 93 and Senate File 96, the 2 water bills, which is the same committee for each, will be meeting here in about a half hour at 12:30 down in 113.
All right. You've heard the motion to recess until 2 p.m. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? We are in recess until 2 p.m.